successes, but he said, look, you haven't seen nothing yet. I can even do better. And I believe that tonight the American people understood that prosperity was on the ballot, and they went and they decided that they wanted to cast their ballot with the future, and that future is Al Gore and Joe Lieberman.
What is the Vice President doing right now, Ms. Brazil?
Well, for the last couple of hours, he's been working with many of us on the phone, calling voters, helping us with the radio phone call program, calling people. He's been working up to the last minute, and he's going to continue to work until the last ballot is cast tonight.
Thank you very much, Donna Brazil, at the Vice President Al Gore headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee. We do want to remind those of you in states where the polls still are open that you can exercise your right to vote. That includes California, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, and the state of Alaska. Those polls close at 11 and then again at midnight in the state of Alaska. Alaska is always considered to be safe Republican territory. I think that it's fair to point out. I remember in 1980 at 8 o'clock, in 1980, we were able to project that Ronald Reagan was going to be elected president of the United States. It was that clear that early. Tonight it's much different than all of that, and as we have been saying, the Governor Bush campaign has been contesting what is going on in Florida. We have projected Florida, the state that will go into Vice President Bush's or Vice President Gore's column. If it does not, all the bets that we've been talking about tonight, Tim, are off.
Absolutely right. In all those states I put up, the 14 states that Governor Bush had to win, I'm not suggesting he's going to win them, Tom. I'm not projecting he's going to win them. They are the ones he has to win. He needs to shoot some bullseyes if, in fact, he doesn't have Florida. If Florida is being contested and that gets back in play, we shake up the map all over again.
And it's also worth pointing out that just because we project a state as a winner for one candidate or for the other, that doesn't make it so. The voters still have the last word in all of this. And Katie, before we get to the exit polls, we want to show you what the raw vote is now in the state of Florida. Can we see that one more time? As you can see, more than half of the vote has been counted so far. And at the moment, according to this, George W. Bush has a 5-point lead in Florida, but of course that always depends on where the vote is counted. We have been conducting interviews with voters all day long. There are scientific models that have held up over the years, but again, to be fair to Governor Bush, especially with polls still open, they are contesting the projected win in the state of Florida, and that's going to be vitally important in Oregon, Washington, California, Hawaii, and Alaska.
And
Katie.
of course, as Karl Rove mentioned, Tim and Tom, you know, there are a lot of absentee ballots still to be counted in Florida, and the Gulf Coast of Florida votes very differently than other areas, for example, South Florida. So he made a point that might be a very different electorate in that part of the state. So it'll be interesting to see how they turn out.
Tom, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me over the last couple of days and said, you know, it feels great because for the first time my vote really seems to count. And you look at this map tonight, it's counting big time, in the words of one of the vice presidential candidates, and it really is extraordinary to see how various states are falling with no discernible pattern between Democrat or Republican.
Let's talk a little bit about the exit polling, about we tried to figure out why this race is such a nail-biter and why it is so close. The candidates are splitting the vote evenly among several important groups, including the middle-class Catholics and, most importantly, independents. Among independents, almost dead even. Bush is getting 45%, Gore 44%, Nader about 7%. Now, Gore was trailing in most of the national polls going into today's vote, but our poll indicates late deciders are now tilting towards Gore. A total of 17% of all voters made up their minds in the final week, and these voters are breaking 5-4 for Gore. One reason for the tilt, which may be surprising to many people, the late report of Governor Bush's drunk driving arrest. Let's look at independents and see how they felt about the arrest. 1/4 of them said it was at least somewhat important to their vote today. Among those who did think it was important, Gore did well, winning 65%. So, Tom, for a race that seemed to be going Bush's way before Election Day, this matter, which many people thought was a pretty inconsequential event, may actually be having an impact at the polls. Tim, I think the latest poll showed that, 83% said it was not a big deal to them that George W. Bush was arrested for drunk driving 24 years ago?
Yeah, and as you focused, rightfully so, on those independent swing voters, who knows what tilted them in the final days? Was it something they thought of judgment or recklessness or preparedness, whatever? Any small thing, Katie, could have tilted this one way or the other in different states for either of the candidates. Important data.
Karl Rove is going to be very happy to hear this, to say nothing of Governor George W. Bush. Missouri for George Bush. Missouri goes into the Bush column. It has voted with the winner in every election in the 20th century, save Dwight David Eisenhower. That's a big win at this critical stage of the evening for Governor Bush, the state of Missouri. And again, to point out, the Bush people are contesting Florida. They claim that they're going to win Florida before it's all over. No doubt they're getting a lot of telephone calls from Tallahassee and other places because Jeb Bush is the governor of the state of Florida. Here's a familiar face from the American political scene, now an analyst for Fox News, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House of Representatives. Tonight, as you look at that electoral map, Mr. Speaker, what do you think? How does the governor get there?
First of all, Thomas, the first time in 26 years I'm not on the ballot, and boy, am I glad. This is quite a cliffhanger. I would just point out that in 1988, the news media gave the Senate seat in Florida to a Democrat, and during the absentee ballot recount, Connie Mack became the senator. In 1992, the news media said that Paul Coverdale had lost, and the next morning they had a runoff, and he actually won the runoff. So Florida, I've been asking all evening, how can you have that many absentee ballots out and assume that Governor Bush has lost the state? And as you know, Karl Rove has said adamantly, they believe when the ballots are all counted, they're going to carry Florida. And I think some of the networks are beginning to back off on giving it to Gore. I think there's beginning to be a sense that, gee, this election may, in fact, as somebody said a little while ago, go all the way to Friday or Saturday while we're counting absentee ballots in Oregon, Washington, and California.
Mr. Speaker, let me just hasten to point out, I always dislike correcting you, but in fact, in 1988, as Connie Mack himself will tell you, NBC News projected that he, in fact, would be the winner, although I know that it was kind of a split decision among the networks.
Okay, I congratulate you.
Okay, and it's important to point out that whatever we project, the voters do have the final word in all of this. It does look like we are going to have a divided nation and a divided government. Whoever wins, it's going to be very close, Republican and Democrat in the House and in the Senate, and no presidential candidate will go to Washington with what you would call an overwhelming mandate.
I think that's right, and I think it probably makes it necessary for whoever the next president is to find a way to sit down with both parties and try to talk through, is there a common agenda that can move on education, on health, on issues that really matter. I think, again, my sense is, as of right now, that Governor Bush is actually going to get a majority or certainly a plurality of the popular vote. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens if, in fact, he doesn't end up with a majority in the Electoral College. But if you look at how the votes are breaking, I think he tends to be carrying his states by bigger margins than Gore is carrying the states that are going for Gore. So as the evening draws on, it's going to be very interesting to see the popular vote as contrasted with the Electoral College.
Well, as a historian and as a man who is an astute student of politics, does that excite you to some degree?
It doesn't excite me. It'll be interesting. We haven't had this since 1888. My hunch is that in the end, whoever gets the popular vote will find a way to get to a majority in the Electoral College. But I think your point's also right. This country clearly is divided, and I think you've got to give Vice President Gore some credit for a very hard-fought closing couple days, which frankly worked better than I thought they would. And I think whoever wins this election is going to have to really focus on how to reunite the country if they're going to get anything done in Washington in the next 2 years.
All right, thank you very much, former Speaker Newt Gingrich. Time to change the meter once again. We change it this time again in favor of Texas Governor George W. Bush. The state of West Virginia, which has been solidly in the Democratic column for a long, long time, Tim, now goes to Governor Bush. And the state of West Virginia, they've been counting on winning. They spent a lot of time down there, 5 electoral votes. But that is strategically important to them right now.
That's a Democratic state. Bill Clinton carried it by 15 points. Those are 2 states I've now taken off the must-win Bush column, Tom. He's at 213. He needs 58. If he wins all these states, Alaska, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, Oregon, Iowa, and New Hampshire, he's elected the next president of the United States.
Put Florida in that equation, just theoretically.
Well, if you add Florida, you suddenly add an extra 25 electoral votes, and you got up to 238. And you can take away Arizona, you can take away Colorado, that's 16, and you can take away Nevada, that's 20, and take away New Hampshire, and it gets a lot easier. Now, Vice President Gore, on the other hand, as we mentioned repeatedly, has led in the polls leading up to today in California, in Hawaii, in Washington, 267. He just needs one of those remaining 9 states, unless you take away Florida. Then he drops down 25 votes from here, which brings it down to 173, and that becomes a very uphill climb.
All right, keep your eye on that number, folks. We'll be back. We'll have something to say about Florida after this Decision 2000.
My name is Master Chief Billy Sunday, and I am God.
Critics are calling men of honor.
Chapin, a place where the Democrats had very high hopes. So as I say, for the Democrats to take over the House tonight, going to be very tough.
There's some more conservative Democrats running for the House this year, and we have a couple of very good visual aids on the current makeup of the House and the Senate and what it would take to shift them. So if I can ask the control room to get those ready, we'll come back to them right after Sam Donaldson on the Senate. Sam.
We have a couple of more projections, Peter. In the state of Nevada, ABC News can project that John Ensign has defeated Ed Bernstein to take the seat that was held by Richard Bryan. Senator Bryan retired. Now, Ensign is a Republican, so that reduces the net pickup of the Democrats so far tonight to only one. And in the state of Utah, rather, welcome to the Union, Utah, Orrin Hatch, a longtime senator of that state, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, ABC News projects, has beaten State Senator Scott Howell to win re-election. It's too close to call still in Missouri, where Mel Carnahan, the late governor's name, is still on the ballot. His widow Jean might be appointed in re-election. It's too close to call still in Missouri, where Mel Carnahan, the late governor's name, is still on the ballot. His widow Jean might be appointed if he wins. And in Michigan, where Spencer Abraham is running against a woman, Debbie Stabenow, still too close to call there.
Sam, let's talk with George. Let's talk first of all about the Senate and the presidential race in Nevada. Nevada is still too close to call. This is a place where you get a lot of Democrats in Las Vegas, fastest growing city in the country, and elsewhere you get Republicans.
That's right, except of the people that have moved to Nevada since 1990, most of them in our exit polls so far are going to George W. Bush, even though, as you're right, Las Vegas has brought in a lot of union members to work in the service industry, the hotel industry. But in Nevada right now, Gore is only winning a bare majority of union voters, far less than he's winning in many of the other states across the country.
And here, of course, in Nevada is another example. We haven't even done the referendums or the propositions around the country. Quite frankly, the presidential race is too wild. But Nevada is one of these places where an enormous local issue, what to do with nuclear waste, has been on everybody's mind. And it's one of those things, as it is in other states, which will energize people to get out and vote in a lot of other races, both in the House and the Senate as well. But let me come first of all to you, Koki, and then to Sam, and ask you to use these visual aids. Give us the current makeup of the House first, Koki, and what it would take for it to change visually.
Well, the current makeup of the House is 223 Republicans, 210 Democrats, and 2 independents, one of them voting with the Republicans, the other with the Democrats. So the Democrats need 7 seats to take the House. Now, they already have one of those 7. There's a Democrat running tonight who is unopposed. So they need 6 seats. Doesn't sound hard, but as you've been seeing from the calls we've been making, they win one here, lose one there, win one here, lose one there. So even though we've projected that they will pick up at least some seats, so far it's hard to see them picking up the 6 they need.
And I don't want to get fixated on Nevada, thanks very much, Koki, but another of the propositions on the ballot there is seeking to amend a constitutional provision that provides that only a marriage can take place between a male and a female person, and that only that shall be recognized and given effect in this state. Another example of a local proposition driving the races at many levels. Sam, makeup of the Senate.
Well, Peter, the makeup of the Senate at the moment is 54 Republicans and 46 Democrats. At the moment, we have shown that net pickup of 1 for the Democrats. But they can pick up more seats. Missouri is still close to call. Michigan's still too close to call. We haven't gotten to Montana, very tight race there. We haven't gotten to Washington State, a very tight race there. It is still possible for the Democrats to pick up more seats, mathematically, but it's highly unlikely that they're going to take the Senate, Peter.
Thank you, Sam. Just take a look at the big picture as it is now. I remember the old days when the click, click, click of the popular vote went on all the time, but the popular vote now shows with 48% for Mr. Gore and 49% for Mr. Bush. And here on the big map, you see those states: Florida, West Virginia, Arkansas, Iowa, Wisconsin, Colorado, Arizona, and Nevada still close to call and yet to be heard from. Oregon and Washington and California and, of course, Hawaii. We'll be right back after your local station checks in with the local results.
home of the News 10 Tower. The 2000 vote continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
Well, to call it a cliffhanger at this moment may be actually an understatement, but take a look at the big map of the country and you'll see. Florida, as you know, we've just said is now too close to call. West Virginia, we are now able to make a projection in West Virginia. We project that West Virginia has gone to George W. Bush. George W. Bush gets West Virginia, leaving Wisconsin, Iowa, and Arkansas, still too close to call, as it is in Colorado, Arizona, and Nevada. But we also called a short while ago that Al Gore's home state of Tennessee was won by Mr. Bush, which takes us to Mr. Gore's campaign manager, Donna Brazile, who is in Nashville tonight. Ms. Brazile, you've been in that state for months. Why did you lose it?
Well, Peter, I still believe that there are absentee ballots that need to be counted here in Tennessee, and there were a lot of early voting that also should be taken into consideration, so perhaps we should call this state into question. I'm not giving up on the Tennesseans yet, but let me just say that we've done a tremendous job across the country.
Can I stop you before you go across the country? I apologize.
No,
you really
okay.
want to seriously call the projections in Tennessee into question as of now?
Well, I haven't seen the latest results from Shelby County. I know that county, which is Memphis, was voting late tonight. People were standing in line. I don't know what the projections are in terms of how many of the early voting precincts came in versus those that came in late. But, you know, we worked very hard in this state. The state has had a lot of changes over the last couple of years. And we'll see what happens in Arkansas and Missouri and some of the other states that,
do you know
how
how many absentee ballots there are to be counted in the state of Tennessee?
No, I do not, but I do know that a lot of people went out and voted early. There were long lines all today in Davidson County here in Nashville, but as I said before, we'll see what happens. I don't know if all of the precincts are reporting or just some of the precincts from the eastern part of the state, but we'll see what happens and, you know, throughout the night.
I must assume that you and the Bush campaign share one thing in common at the moment, and that's extreme nervousness.
And optimism as well. I mean, this election, it was close. It was too close to call over the weekend. The tide is turning in Al Gore's favor, and I believe that we're going to pull it out tonight.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. Donna Brazile, who's the campaign manager for Mr. Gore. I want to go right now to Austin, Texas, where ABC's Dean Reynolds is standing by. Dean, on the business of Florida and the other states from the Bush point of view.
Well, I don't think it's surprising, Peter, that you would find both campaigns with something critical to say about the coverage. And the Bush campaign is saying that the networks may have done them a disservice by calling Florida so early and having the effect of depressing Republican support in other parts of the country, because the Republican supporters might have thought that that gave the election, in effect, to Al Gore. Now, that's the second complaint the Bush people have had tonight about the coverage. The first was that they thought that the networks were taking too much time in projecting Bush the winner in both Ohio and West Virginia. But as I say, in a race like this, nobody's going to be happy until the last vote is counted.
Okay, thanks very much, Dean Reynolds, who's in Austin tonight. George Stephanopoulos, I want you to pick up on a couple of things, if you would. First of all, Donna Brazile's notion that a lot of states are going to be questioned.
Oh, I think there's just no question about that. I don't know if Tennessee is going to be one of them, right. Even though the black turnout was quite high there. It does look like it's pretty solidly going for Governor Bush tonight. It depends on how close they are at the end, Peter. But in a race where the Electoral College is this close, there's no question if you've got final popular votes within the margin, there's going to be a call. Look back to 1960. In the 1960 race between Nixon and Kennedy, the Republican chairman challenged the votes in 11 states after their vote, and it was a frenzy for several weeks.
Right. Just remind people why it is too close. Take a look up there at the electoral vote now. With Mr. Bush has 217, Mr. Gore has 173. Mr. Bush, as you've heard just a moment ago, has questioned the giving of Florida to Mr. Gore and then taking it back, which, as I said, many news agencies did. A little hard to believe, at least in the case of Oregon, where people had a chance to mail in their ballots and have had weeks to suppress the vote there. Possibility in Washington.
I suppose there's a chance in Washington that some people would stay home, but one of the things we've been hearing from the Bush campaign for several weeks is how energized Republicans are, how enthused they are, how certain they are to come out and vote no matter what in this election. So I think that's a little bit questionable whether that would depress some Republicans at the last minute.
Okay, thanks, Rich. I want to ask Mark Halperin, our political director, the same question, the effect of early reporting on the western states, particularly Oregon and Washington tonight?
Every state has its own rules for how you vote. As you said, Oregon and Washington, heavy mail-in. Oregon, all mail-in ballots. Washington, many of the ballots mailed in. Every other state, though, that's close, again, I don't want to predict this, we talked about this earlier, but I would suspect we're in a much more litigious society than we were in 1960. These are two campaigns in an environment of partisanship. I would suspect that the lawyers are going to look at every close state. Donna Brazile saying maybe their absentee ballots in Arkansas is still out. Every ballot, the handling of every ballot in every close state, I think is going to get some scrutiny.
I don't know the answer to this, among other things, but do we know at this point how many absentee ballots there are out in any given state?
It depends on the state and how much they tell us, but in many of these states, for the two that are still not called by us, in Iowa and in Washington, absentee ballots only need to be postmarked by a certain date. They don't need to be in and received by a certain date. So if those two states end up deciding this, we may not know until they're done counting a little bit down the road.
Okay, and in the case of Florida, they are indeed counting the absentee ballots at this very moment. And as we've said before, that was one of the things the Republicans were counting on, was a large absentee ballot of 100,000 votes or more. But on why Florida is still too close to call, ABC's Lynn Scherr. Lynn.
Peter, according to our exit polling, the reason why Florida is so hard to call at this point has to do with with one voter group and one really important issue. Let's start with the voter group. Independents. Independents in Florida today, 22% of the voting population. And of them, how did they vote? 47% for Al Gore, 45% for George Bush. That is a virtual tie. Now, there is another question that we've been asking all day long in states all across the country. Do you want the government to do more for citizens or to do less? In most states, I should tell you, and nationally as a whole, the answer is they want the government to do less. Not in Florida. Let's take a look at the number. Should the government do more or do less? Well, you're going to see it's an even split. 47% say the government should do more. 47% say the government should do less. As you can expect, the do more is about one way, the do less is the other, and that's one of the reasons, Peter.
Thanks very much, Lynn. Indeed, as Lynn points out or alludes, in other states in the course of the evening, we have found that tendency towards less government rather than big government. Big campaign message for George W. Bush all the time. Al Gore is for big government, bigger than Bill Clinton. And it was something from which Mr. Gore did not effectively fight back, as you see reflected in the exit polls this evening. Our historian, Michael Beschloss, 1960, recount Richard Nixon's request.
Yeah, you know, I'm sorry to keep on mentioning 1960, Peter, but it really is germane. In 1960, you know, John Kennedy won the election, won the Electoral College because of two states, Texas and Illinois. 26,000 vote margin roughly in Texas, about 8,000 votes in Illinois. Richard Nixon felt that there had been vote fraud in both places and was thinking of challenging the results of the election. He met with John Kennedy a couple of days later. Kennedy's first comment was, well, Dick, we really don't know who won the election, do we? And Nixon thought about a recount, talked to Dwight Eisenhower, realized that it would put the country through much too much of a trauma to do that. So the result was that he conceded, but for the next 8 years, he kept on telling people, Kennedy stole the election from me in 1960.
But Michael, John F. Kennedy's election in 1960 is still clouded on that issue in some people's minds, is it not?
That's exactly right. We do not yet have a settled view on whether there was vote fraud or not. But you know, the historical thing that happened, Peter, was that Richard Nixon was so embittered by what he thought to be the theft of the election from him in 1960 that he was absolutely determined that this would never happen again. That's one reason why he did the kind of things that led to Watergate in 72, 73, and 74.
I'm going to come back to you a little later in the evening about embittered candidates after the results. Mark Halperin, we haven't talked about it for many hours. The possibility of tampering with the vote, of fraudulent voting, is very alive in the party's minds.
We're talking again, as we said earlier in the evening, over 100 million transactions in all likelihood by the end of the night in terms of how many people voted. There are mistakes made. All of us know when you go and vote, sometimes there's something wrong. That's just accidents. Every election, there's some sort of fraud. It may not be, almost certainly, I would say, not directed by the two presidential campaigns, but you've got local races where people are trying to help themselves. It goes on all the time in American politics. This time, unlike 1960 again, I think the lawyers will want to at least take a look at it.
A slight flaw in the great democratic experiment. Thank you very much. We'll be back to continue our coverage of Election 2000 in just a moment.
Take the ABC News American Election Challenge. Which president was elected with the largest percentage of the popular vote? Lyndon B. Johnson, Bill Clinton, John Kennedy, Thomas Jefferson. In a moment, the answer. This ABC News special is being brought to you by Dodge.
Want the lowdown on Dodge Durango? Here's where it's best-in-class Magnum V8 power.
This is a national sales alert from Dodge. Effective immediately, you can get low 0.9 financing for 60 months on 2000 Dodge Durango. You can now save more than $5,600 or get up to $2,000 cash allowance. We now return you to your regularly scheduled commercial.
See the friendly Dodge dealer near you.
We noticed tons of surfers just eating fish tacos on the docks.
So we created just a menu based on food that we like.
Kind of like surf food as opposed to Mexican food.
Now that we're growing, the need for the financial partner was real important. Finding somebody who could help us to fulfill our dreams down the road. That's where Merrill Lynch has stepped up.
They were willing to take a chance with us. They saw past the shorts and t-shirts. Oh, we're still keeping to the core. We're still surfing. We're in the groove.
Wednesday. 5 seconds, Drew. The Drew Carey Show goes live in 3 time zones.
Ooh, I better get into my costume.
Then, Caitlin co-hosts on Live with Regis.
You don't want to poke me.
Don't want to poke you? Why not? On Spin City.
All right. You better phone a friend.
It's all new. See you Wednesday live on ABC.
Next Tuesday,
We're putting this band together.
a son's dream and a father's expectations collide.
Maybe you should just put this band thing on hold for a while.
What?
And it will all come to a breaking point.
I'm not going to stand by and watch you make the biggest mistake of your life.
The critics call it First Class, and all new Once and Again next Tuesday on ABC. The answer to the ABC News American Election Challenge, which president was elected with the largest percentage of the popular vote, is Lyndon B. Johnson, elected in 1964 with 61.1% of the popular vote. Once again, Peter Jennings.
61% of the vote, Lyndon Johnson in 1964. But it brings up a very interesting issue for us tonight, because if you look over there at the vote, which has the electoral vote and the popular vote as of now, we're very early in the popular vote if you look at the numbers, because we all think that at least 100 million people will cast ballots tonight. But currently, Al Gore has 48% of the vote with 23 million votes, and George Bush has 24 million votes. That may not be a very accurate reflection of what's happening at this moment, because it's hard to keep up with the popular vote. But George Stephanopoulos, on this subject of the obvious one, if one man wins the popular vote and the other man wins the electoral vote, who wins?
Whoever wins the Electoral College. It's not who scores the most runs or who wins the most votes, it's who wins the most states. And that's always been our system. There have been 3 times in our history. The last time was in 1888, when the person who won the Electoral College, when the person who won the popular vote, Garfield, did not win the Electoral College. Most people believe it's unlikely, although the Gore campaign has said throughout that if they're within a point or a point and a half, there is a way they can win in the Electoral College, even if they lose the popular vote. But there's a lot of big states out there yet.
And there have been others. There are actually 3 circumstances, I think, where the popular vote exceeded the electoral vote.
That's
winner.
right, and I don't have all of them right now, but in 1824, John Quincy Adams was elected president, even though Andrew Jackson won the plurality of both the popular vote and the electoral vote, but he didn't win a majority of those, so John Quincy Adams cut a deal with Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, who was then made Secretary of State. 4 years later, Andrew Jackson came back and was elected president.
And every time it happens, people wish to tamper with the Electoral College. And it just simply never happens. But they're quite modern movements to change it.
There have been calls. I think the last time was Birch Bayh, actually, a Democrat about 25 years ago, tried to get a movement to change it. The Republicans opposed it. This time, I'm sure if we get into the situation this time, you'll see a lot of calls from whoever the loser is.
Jimmy Carter wanted to change it too, or thought it was worth considering. Okay, now, we can't talk about vote tampering without Sam Donaldson leaping out of his position there. Sam?
Well, Peter, the classic case of alleged vote fraud was in 1948 in Texas. I say alleged only because of the sensibilities that I have toward the people in the Johnson family who are still alive. Lyndon Johnson was running for the Senate, very tight race. On election night, there were 3 small counties in South Texas. Duval County, owned by George Parr, the political boss, being the central one. They withheld the ballot box, famous ballot box 13. Not only did they vote dead people, but they waited to see how many votes Lyndon Johnson needed. And then finally, Eureka. Here comes ballot box 13, and everyone voted for Lyndon Johnson. And he won in the state by 87 votes and earned his nickname Landslide Lyndon.
Thank you, Sam. Let's go to West Virginia now and take a look at that. You know, we've already projected West Virginia for Mr. Bush. This is a state, Lynn, which has gone with the Democrats for a long period of time in every election, I think since 1960, but